First of all, I would like to apologize in advance if I mispronounce some words. I'm sick, but I still wanted to do this video. Warning! If you are one of those people who use MBTI to feel validated or special, this video isn't for you. So please kindly click away and have a pleasant day. For other people who want to be informed and want to see the rant about the whole MBTI community, you're welcome, but don't say you haven't been warned. This is a rant about the problem with the entire MBTI community, because I can't stand it anymore. Who am I, you might ask? You have less than 1,000 subscribers, so who are you to judge? Well, I have read Jung, Marie-Louise von Franz, and Beebe, so I'm well informed. I'm so tired of the MBTI be the new trendy horoscope for millennials and Generation Z. Being a millennial myself, what I hate the most is how do they do their typing. They usually take a test. The most popular one is called 16 personalities, and I get it. It has a beautiful design, good marketing, and the result of the test makes everyone feel special. But this test is completely wrong. Also, other tests made by other pages are wrong. Why, you might ask? Because this test in particular is made up of a mix between the Big Five and typology. They try to simplify typology by making it cool and easy so everyone can feel like a special butterfly. People usually type like this. Do you have few to no friends and don't like to spend time outside? Introvert. Otherwise, you're an extrovert. Are you creative and unique? Then you must be an intuitive. Do you have emotions? Then you must be a feeler. Because if you're a thinker, you must be like a robot. Are you a mess? Then you must be a perceiver. If not, then a judger. And I hope I was joking, but this is seriously how most people type. It's either this or taking a stupid test with questionable resources. Put this inside your head. The test doesn't work. Not even the cognitive function tests work. Typing is more complicated, and it would be easier for you to type other people than yourself, if you have the proper knowledge. Why, you might ask? Because you can easily observe how people perceive the world and make choices, whereas with your unconscious you can't. If you want to properly type yourself, you should ask the closest people what are you like and what are your struggles. In my case, I met MBTI back when Tumblr was alive. 16personalities.com didn't even exist. It was trendy and someone asked me for my MBTI. As a good millennial, I did a Google search. I took a test and told him apparently I am an extrovert, whatever, but it's inaccurate because I consider myself an introvert. I mean, I don't go out to discos or bars. I prefer to go out with few friends. Anyway, the test became popular and my former best friend asked me to take it again, this time 16personality.com. I got an ENFJ as a result, and I told my friend at the time that apparently I'm like the Daenerys Mama Dragon, and she said that's completely wrong. I did it 2 more times, each time with a different result, and for the last result she said, "This is more like you." I was surprised because I didn't consider myself to be that type. Considering we were friends since our childhood, she probably knew me better than anyone else. So I decided to deep dive into MBTI. I found C.S. Joseph's channel and he described a lot of types and their cognitive functions. Thanks to him, I understood that typology actually had a basis and not just a stupid test. I was surprised when he described my type because he nailed it in a lot of ways. Nevertheless, MBTIs and their gurus want to make money. C.S. Joseph started to make posts of typings I didn't agree with. I first applied it, but then, when doing research, I found out that his method led me to mistype several individuals. And I also met Armchair Typology, which provide me with the actual books. I like his method of typing. I totally recommend him. He's very knowledgeable and doesn't do it for the money, unlike many MBTI gurus inventing their own systems to make money. I don't mind them making money in a way that it's not harmful to others. As they say, you do you. But what I dislike is people who don't even watch videos of people who have read the proper sources and start making a lot of mess in the community. Speaking of that, Personality Database is by far the worst typing page I ever seen. This is because it's based on a majority voting. And let's be honest, most people are lazy and type with stereotypes, not with proper knowledge. So now, it's going to be the boring part where I start to read from these 3 books. But why, you might ask? You could have used ChatGPT to summarize it. Here, I say no. I think you should have all the proper words used by Jungian analyst and Jung himself, not with someone with no degrees or studies on the matter. The actual typology, or 16 types, come from Jung, and it's an unfinished project. Actually, he didn't even mention 16 types. He mentions just 8 types because he focuses on these primary things, the unconscious attitude. When you say, "I'm so proud that I am this certain type," you must be mistype. Jung said that it wasn't something to be proud of or conscious of, but something to be ashamed of. This isn't about the letters, this is about the cognitive functions. Now, here is where I start to read the books. For this, I'm going to use AI. If you, however, are one of those people who can only stand to watch TikToks from 45 seconds, you might skip to Beebe because he might be more digestible to you, since he summarized it very well. But bear into your mind that you won't get the full information.
By the introverted and extroverted types, I distinguish 2 general classes of men, which can be further subdivided into function types. That is, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuitive types. Hence, an introvert can be either a thinking or a feeling type, since feeling as well as thinking can come under the supremacy of the idea, just as both can be dominated by the object. Thus, it is not to be a detachment or redemption of the inferior function, but an acknowledgement of it, a coming to 121 terms with it, that unites the opposites on the path of nature. But Scheller feels that the acceptance of the inferior function might lead to a conflict of blind instincts, just as, conversely, the unity of the ideal might re-establish the supremacy of the valuable function over the less valuable ones, and thereby restore the original state of affairs. The inferior functions are opposed to the superior, not so much in their essential nature as because of their momentary form. They were originally neglected and repressed because they hindered civilized man from attaining his aims. But these consist of one-sided interests and are by no means synonymous with the perfection of human individuality. If that were the aim, these unacknowledged functions would be indispensable, and as a matter of fact, they do not by nature contradict it. But so long as the cultural aim does not coincide with the ideal of perfecting the human individuality, these functions are subject to depreciation and some degree of repression. The conscious acceptance of repressed functions is equivalent to an internal civil war. The opposites, previously restrained, are unleashed and the independence of character is abolished forthwith. This independence can be attained only by a settlement of the conflict, which appears to be impossible without despotic jurisdiction over the opposing forces. In that way, freedom is compromised, and without it the building up of a morally free personality is equally impossible.
The 4 functions, sensation, thinking, feeling, and intuition, each of which can be extroverted or introverted, produce 8 types: extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, extroverted feeling, introverted feeling, etc. I am assuming you know about the arrangement of the functions, namely, that the 2 rational functions, thinking and feeling, are opposite each other, as are the 2 irrational functions, sensation and intuition. The behavior of the inferior function is wonderfully mirrored in those fairy tales where there is the following structure. A king has 3 sons. He likes the 2 elder sons, but the youngest is regarded as a fool. The king then sets a task in which the sons may have to find the water of life, or the most beautiful bride, or chase away a secret enemy who every night steals the horses or the golden apples out of the royal garden. Generally, The two elder sons set out and get nowhere or get stuck. And then the third saddles his horse while everybody laughs and tells him he'd better stay at home by the stove where he belongs. But it is he who usually performs the great task. If one studies individual cases, one can see that the inferior function tends to behave after the manner of such a fool hero, the divine fool or idiot hero. He represents the despised part of the personality, the ridiculous and unadapted part, but also the part that builds up the connection with the unconscious and therefore holds the secret key to the unconscious totality of the person. To the general outline of the inferior function belongs the fact that it is generally slow, in contrast to the superior function. Jung calls it infantile and tyrannical. We have to go into this in detail. One of the great troubles of the inferior function is its slowness, which is the reason why people hate to start work on it. The reaction of the superior function comes out quickly and well adapted, while many people have no idea where their inferior function really is. The principal and auxiliary functions. The inferior function is the door through which all the figures of the unconscious come into consciousness. Our conscious realm is like a room with 4 doors, and it is the 4th door by which the shadow, the animus or the anima, and the personification of the self come in. They do not enter as often through the other doors, which is in a way self-evident. The inferior function is so close to the unconscious and remains so barbaric and inferior and undeveloped that it is naturally the weak spot in consciousness through which the figures of the unconscious can break in. The inferior function is the ever-bleeding wound of the conscious personality, but through it the unconscious can always come in and so enlarge consciousness and bring forth a new attitude. As long as one has not developed the other functions, the 2 auxiliary functions, they too will be open doors. In a person who has only developed one superior function, the 2 auxiliary functions will operate in the same way as the inferior function and will appear in personifications of the shadow, the animus and the anima. When one has succeeded in developing 3 functions, in locking 3 of the inner doors, the problem of the 4th door still remains, for that is the one that is apparently meant not to be locked. There one has to succumb. One has to suffer defeat in order to develop further.
Extroverted thinking. This type will, by definition, be a man whose constant endeavor in so far, of course, as he is a pure type, is to make all his activities dependent on intellectual conclusions, which in the last resort are always oriented by objective data, whether these be external facts or generally accepted ideas. This type of man elevates objective reality, or an objectively oriented intellectual formula, into the ruling principle not only for himself but for his whole environment. Everything that agrees with this formula is right, everything that contradicts it is wrong, and anything that passes by it indifferently is merely incidental. Because this formula seems to embody the entire meaning of life, the first function to be affected by the conscious inhibition is feeling, since it is the most opposed to the rigid intellectual formula, and is therefore repressed the most intensely. No function can be entirely eliminated, it can only be greatly distorted. Insofar as feeling is compliant and lets itself be subordinated, it has to support the conscious attitude and adapt to its aims. But this is possible only up to a point. Part of it remains refractory and has to be repressed. If the repression is successful, the subliminal feeling then functions in a way that is opposed to the conscious aims, even producing effects whose cause is a complete enigma to the individual. For example, the conscious altruism of this type, which is often quite extraordinary, may be thwarted by a secret self-seeking which gives a selfish twist to actions that in themselves are disinterested. Purely ethical intentions may lead him into critical situations which sometimes have more than a semblance of being the outcome of motives far from ethical. The thinking of the extroverted type is positive, that is productive. It leads to the discovery of new facts or to general conceptions based on disparate empirical material. It is usually synthetic too, even when it analyzes it constructs, because it is always advancing beyond the analysis to a new combination, to a further conception which reunites the analyzed material in a different way or adds something to it.
This type is to be found among organizers, people in high office and government positions, in business, in law, and among scientists. They can compile useful encyclopedias. They dig up all the dust in old libraries and do away with the inhibiting factors in science that are caused by clumsiness, or laziness, or a lack of clarity in language. The extroverted thinking type establishes order by taking a definite stand and saying, if we say so, and so, we mean so and so. They put clarifying order into the outer situation. The extroverted thinking type has, as I said already, a kind of mystical feeling attachment for ideals and often also for people. But this deep, strong, warm feeling hardly ever comes out. I remember an extroverted thinking type who, when he once came out with his feeling for his wife, really moved me. But when I talked to his wife, it was deplorable to see how little she knew of it, because, as a mad extrovert, he would spend the whole day in his profession, milling around in life, and those deep feelings were never expressed. If his wife had been dying of consumption, he would not have noticed it until he was at the funeral, and she did not realize the depth of his feeling for her, and that, in a deep sense, he was loyal and faithful to her. That was hidden and not expressed in his life. It remained introverted and did not move towards the object. It took quite a few sessions to get a better understanding in the marriage and to make the wife realize that her husband really loved her. He was so terribly occupied with the outer world, and his feeling was so hidden and unexpressed in his life that his wife did not realize what a tremendous hidden role these feelings played within him. Introverted feeling, even if it is the main function, is very difficult to understand. A very good example of it is the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke. He once wrote, "Ich liebe dich, was geht's dit denn? I love you, but it's none of your business." That is love for love's sake. Feeling is very strong, but it does not flow towards the object. It is rather like being in a state of love with oneself. The hidden, introverted feeling of the extroverted thinking type establishes strong invisible loyalties. Such people are among the most faithful of all friends, even though they may only write at Christmas. They are absolutely faithful in their feeling, but one has to move towards it to get to know of its existence.
Extroverted feeling. The extrovert's feeling is always in harmony with objective values. For anyone who has known feeling only as something subjective, the nature of extroverted feeling will be difficult to grasp, because it has detached itself as much as possible from the subjective factor and subordinated itself entirely to the influence of the object. Even when it appears not to be qualified by a concrete object, it is nonetheless still under the spell of traditional or generally accepted. We have already seen that the extroverted feeling type suppresses thinking most of all, because this is the function most liable to disturb feeling. But since logic nevertheless exists and enforces its inexorable conclusions, this must take place somewhere, and it takes place outside consciousness, namely in the unconscious. Accordingly, the unconscious of this type contains first and foremost a peculiar kind of thinking, a thinking that is infantile, archaic, negative, so long as the conscious feeling preserves its personal quality, or, to put it another way, so long as the personality is not swallowed up in successive states of feeling, this unconscious thinking remains compensatory.
The extroverted feeling type is characterized by the fact that his main adaptation is carried by an adequate evaluation of outer objects and an appropriate relation to them. This type will therefore make friends very easily, will have very few illusions about people, but will be capable of evaluating their positive and negative sides appropriately. These are well-adjusted, very reasonable people who roll along amiably through society, can get what they want quite easily, and can somehow arrange it that everybody is willing to give them what they want. They lubricate their surroundings so marvelously that life goes along very easily. Because people of the extroverted feeling type have such a tremendous capacity for objectively feeling the other person's situation, they are usually the ones who most genuinely sacrifice themselves for others. If one is alone at home with the flu, it is certainly an extroverted feeling type who will turn up first and ask who is doing the shopping and how he can help. The extroverted feeling type dislikes thinking because that is his inferior function, and what he dislikes most of all is introverted thinking about philosophical principles or abstractions or basic questions of life. Such deeper questions are carefully avoided, and there is the reaction that thinking about such problems is melancholy. The unfortunate thing is that he does think of such things, but is not aware of it, and because his thinking is neglected, it tends to become negative and coarse. It consists of coarse, primitive thinking judgments, without the slightest differentiation and very often with a negative tinge. I have also seen in the extroverted feeling type very negative thoughts about the neighboring people, very critical, I would say overcritical thinking judgments, which he never allows really to come out.
Extroverted sensation. Sensation, in the extroverted attitude, is preeminently conditioned by the object. As sense perception, sensation is naturally dependent on objects, but, just as naturally, it is also dependent on the subject, for which reason there is subjective sensation of a kind entirely different from objective sensation. In the extroverted attitude, the subjective component of sensation, so far as its conscious application is concerned, is either inhibited or repressed. No other human type can equal the extroverted sensation type in realism. His sense for objective facts is extraordinarily developed. His life is an accumulation of actual experiences of concrete objects, and the more pronounced his type, the less use does he make of his experience. Above all, the repressed intuitions begin to assert themselves in the form of projections. The wildest suspicions arise if the object is a sexual one. Jealous fantasies and anxiety states gain the upper hand. More acute cases develop every sort of phobia, and, in particular, compulsion symptoms. The pathological contents have a markedly unreal character, with a frequent moral or religious streak. All these things have their source in the repressed inferior functions which have been driven into harsh opposition to the conscious attitude, and they appear in a guise that is all the more striking because they rest on the most absurd assumptions, in complete contrast to the conscious sense of reality.
The extroverted sensation type is represented in someone whose gift and specialized function is to sense and relate in a concrete and practical way to outer objects. Such people observe everything, smell everything, and on entering a room know almost at once how many people are present. This inferior kind of intuition was very often right, but sometimes completely wrong. Sometimes he just had persecution ideas, dark suspicions, without any foundation. A type who is so accurate on the factual level can suddenly get melancholy, suspicious premonitions, ideas of dark possibilities, and one does not know how these suddenly creep up. That is how inferior intuition came up in his case.
Extroverted intuitive. The primary function of intuition, however, is simply to transmit images or perceptions of relations between things, which could not be transmitted by the other functions or only in a very roundabout way. These images have the value of specific insights which have a decisive influence on action whenever intuition is given priority. The intuitive is never to be found in the world of accepted reality values, but he has a keen nose for anything new and in the making, because he is always seeking out new possibilities. Stable conditions suffocate him. He seizes on new objects or situations with great intensity, sometimes with extraordinary enthusiasm, only to abandon them cold-bloodedly, without any compunction and apparently without remembering them, as soon as their range is known and no further developments can be divined. So long as a new possibility is in the offing, the intuitive is bound to it with the shackles of fate. These persons have stirred up the archaic sensations. This leads to an unconscious, compulsive tie which bodes nobody any good. Cases of this kind are themselves symptomatic of compulsion, to which the intuitive is as prone as the sensation type. His conscious attitude towards both sensation and object is one of ruthless superiority. Not that he means to be ruthless or superior, he simply does not see the object that everyone else sees and rides roughshod over it, just as the sensation type has no eyes for its soul. But sooner or later, the object takes revenge in the form of compulsive hypochondriacal ideas, phobias, and every imaginable kind of absurd bodily sensation.
Intuition is a function by which we conceive possibilities. Future. Intuition is therefore the capacity for intuiting that which is not yet visible, future possibilities or potentialities in the background of a situation. The extroverted intuitive type applies this to the outer world and therefore will score very high in surmising the future outer development around him. Intuition needs to look at things from afar or vaguely in order to function, so as to get a certain hunch from the unconscious, to half shut the eyes and not look at facts too closely. If one looks at things too precisely, the focus is on facts, and then the hunch cannot come through. Inferior sensation, like all inferior functions, is in such people slow, heavy, and loaded with emotion. Because it is introverted, it is turned away from the outer world and its affairs. It has, like all inferior functions, a mystical quality about it. There one sees how the inferior function is the door to experiencing the deeper layers of the unconscious. This intuitive type got out of his ego and ego purposes via this contact with nature and with the horse. One sees very clearly that even if the inferior function appears outside in a horse, for example, it obviously carries a symbolic meaning. Attending to the horse was a first personification of the impersonal collective unconscious for him. It is important for an intuitive type to do this concretely and very slowly, and not immediately exclaim, "Oh, the horse is a symbol of the unconscious," etc. He must stick to the actual horse and attend to it, even though he knows it is a symbol.
Introverted thinking. Introverted thinking is primarily oriented by the subjective factor. At the very least, the subjective factor expresses itself as a feeling of guidance which ultimately determines judgment. Sometimes it appears as a more or less complete image which serves as a criterion. But whether introverted thinking is concerned with concrete or with abstract objects, always at the decisive points, it is oriented by subjective data. It does not lead from concrete experience back again to the object, but always to the subjective content. External facts are not the aim and origin of this thinking, though the introvert would often like to make his thinking appear so. It formulates questions and creates theories. It opens up new prospects and insights. But with regard to facts, its attitude is one of reserve. They are all very well as illustrative examples, but they must not be allowed to predominate. Facts are collected as evidence for a theory, never for their own sake. If ever this happens, it is merely a concession to the extroverted style. Facts are of secondary importance for this kind of thinking. What seems to it of paramount importance is the development 532 and presentation of the subjective idea, of the initial symbolic image hovering darkly before the mind's eye. Its aim is never an intellectual reconstruction of the concrete fact, but a shaping of that dark image into a luminous idea. He is strongly influenced by ideas, though his ideas have their origin not in objective data, but in his subjective foundation. He will follow his ideas like the extrovert, but in the reverse direction, inwards and not outwards. Intensity is his aim, not extensity. In these fundamental respects, he differs quite unmistakably from his extroverted counterpart. What distinguishes the other, namely his intense relation to objects, is almost completely lacking in him, as in every introverted type. Just as the subjectivized consciousness of the introverted thinker, striving after abstraction to the nth degree, only succeeds in intensifying a thought process that is in itself empty. The intensification of egocentric feeling only leads to inane transports of feeling for their own sake. This is the mystical, ecstatic stage which opens the way for the extroverted functions that feeling has repressed.
The main activity of this type is not so much trying to establish order in outer objects. It is more concerned with ideas. Someone who would say that one should not start with facts, but first clarify one's ideas, would belong to the introverted thinking type. His wish to bring order into life starts off with the idea that if one is muddle-headed from the very start, one will never get anywhere. It is first necessary to know what ideas to follow and where they come from. One must clean up muddle-headedness by digging into the background of one's thoughts. The introverted thinking type always goes back to the subjective idea, namely, to what the subject is doing in the whole matter. The feeling of the introverted thinking type is extroverted. He has the same kind of strong, loyal, and warm feeling described as typical for the extroverted thinking type, but with the difference that the feeling of the introverted thinking type flows towards definite objects, while the extroverted thinking type deeply loves his wife but says with Rilke, "I love you, but it is none of your business." The feeling of the introverted thinking type is tied to external objects. He would therefore say, in the Rilke style, "I love you, and it will be your business. I'll make it your business." Otherwise, the introverted thinking type's feeling has very much the same characteristics as the inferior feeling of the extroverted thinking type. His feeling can be very easily poisoned by other people and by the collective atmosphere. The inferior feeling of both types is sticky, and the extroverted thinking type has that kind of invisible faithfulness that can last endlessly. The same is true for the extroverted feeling of the introverted thinking type, except that it will not be invisible. If you evaluate it positively, it will be faithful. But in a negative evaluation, it is sticky. In both thinking types, inferior feeling is without calculation, whereas people who have differentiated feeling are, in a hidden way, calculating. They always put a little bit of ego into it. The inferior feeling of a thinking type shows either very good or very bad taste. A thinking type can sometimes choose very valuable people for his friends, or he can pick absolutely the wrong ones. The inferior function has both aspects, and it rarely fits into conventional patterns.
Introverted feeling, as they are mainly guided by their subjective feelings. Their true motives generally remain hidden. Their outward demeanor is harmonious, inconspicuous, giving an impression of pleasing repose or of sympathetic response, with no desire to affect others, to impress, influence, or change them in any way. The truth is, their feelings are intensive rather than extensive. They develop in depth. Whenever the unconscious subject is identified with the ego, the mysterious power of intensive feeling turns into a banal and overweening desire to dominate, into vanity and despotic bossiness. This produces a type of woman notorious for her unscrupulous ambition and mischievous cruelty. It is a change, however, that leads to neurosis. Although the unconscious thinking is archaic, its reductive tendencies help to compensate the occasional fits of trying to exalt the ego into the subject. If this should nevertheless happen as a result of complete suppression of the counterbalancing subliminal processes, the unconscious thinking goes over into open opposition and gets projected.
They have a highly differentiated scale of values, but they do not express them outwardly. They are affected by them within. One often finds the introverted feeling type in the background where important and valuable events are taking place, as if their introverted feeling had told them that is the real thing. With a kind of silent loyalty, and without any explanation, they turn up in places where important and valuable inner facts, archetypal constellations, are to be found. They also generally exert a positive secret influence on their surroundings by setting standards. The others observe them, and though they say nothing, for they are too introverted to express themselves much, they set certain standards. But their extroverted thinking roams about in an extraordinary range of outer facts. If they want to use their extroverted thinking in a creative way, they have the usual extrovert's difficulty of being overwhelmed by too much material, too many references, and too many facts. So their inferior extroverted thinking sometimes just get lost in a morass of details through which they can no longer find their way. The inferiority of their extroverted thinking very often expresses itself in a certain monomania. They have actually only one or two thoughts with which they race through a tremendous amount of material. The advantage of inferior extroverted thinking is what I just now characterized negatively as racing with a few ideas through a tremendous amount of material. Inferior extroverted thinking has just the same negative tendencies of becoming tyrannical, stiff and unyielding, and in that way not quite adapted to its object, that all other inferior functions have.
Introverted sensation. The predominance of introverted sensation produces a definite type, which is characterized by certain peculiarities. It is an irrational type, because it is oriented amid the flux of events not by rational judgment, but simply by what happens. Whereas the extroverted sensation type is guided by the intensity of objective influences, the introverted type is guided by the intensity of the subjective sensation excited by the objective stimulus. Obviously, therefore, no proportional relation exists between object and sensation, but one that is apparently quite unpredictable and arbitrary. What will make an impression and what will not can never be seen in advance and from outside. He may be conspicuous for his calmness and passivity, or for his rational self-control. This peculiarity, which often leads a superficial judgment astray, is really due to his unrelatedness to objects. His unconscious is distinguished chiefly by the repression of intuition, which consequently acquires an extroverted and archaic character, whereas true extroverted intuition is possessed of a singular resourcefulness, a good 555 no's, for objectively real possibilities. This archaicized intuition has an amazing flair for all the ambiguous, shadowy, sordid, dangerous possibilities lurking in the background. The real and conscious intentions of the object mean nothing to it. Instead, it sniffs out every conceivable archaic motive underlying such an intention. It therefore has a dangerous and destructive quality that contrasts glaringly with the well-meaning innocuousness of the conscious attitude.
When somebody comes into the room, such a type notices the way the person comes in, the hair, the expression on the face, the clothes, and the way the person walks. All this makes a very precise impression on the introverted sensation type. Every detail is absorbed. The impression comes from the object to the subject. It is as though a stone fell into deep water. The impression falls deeper and deeper and sinks in. The introverted sensation type, therefore, gives the impression of being very slow, which is not actually the case. It is only that the quick inner reactions go on underneath, and the outer reaction comes in a delayed way. These are the people who, if told a joke in the morning, will probably laugh at midnight. This type is very often misjudged and misunderstood by others because one does not realize what goes on within. If such a type can express his photographic impressions artistically, they can be reproduced either in painting or in writing. But the intuition of this type is concerned with events that go on in the background. He picks up the possibilities and the future of the outer surroundings. I have seen in an introverted sensation type material that I would call very prophetic archetypal fantasies that do not mainly represent the problem of the dreamer, but those of his time. The assimilation of these fantasies is very difficult because sensation, the dominant function, is a function with which we comprehend the here and now. The negative aspect of sensation is that the type gets stuck in concrete reality. As Jung once noted, for them the future does not exist. Future possibilities do not exist. They are in the here and the now, and there is an iron curtain before them. They behave in life as though it will always be the same as it is now. They are incapable of conceiving that things might change.
Introverted intuitive. As a rule, the intuitive stops at perception. Perception is his main problem. and in the case of a creative artist, the shaping of his perception. But the crank is content with a visionary idea by which he himself is shaped and determined. Naturally, the intensification of intuition often results in an extraordinary aloofness of the individual from tangible reality. The moral problem arises when the intuitive tries to relate himself to his vision, when he is no longer satisfied with mere perception and its aesthetic configuration and evaluation. When he confronts the questions, what does this mean for me or the world? What emerges from this vision in the way of a duty or a task, for me or the world? What the introverted intuitive represses most of all is the sensation of the object, and this colors his whole unconscious. It gives rise to a compensatory extroverted sensation function of an archaic character. The unconscious personality can best be described as an extroverted sensation type of a rather low and primitive order. Instinctuality and intemperance are the hallmarks of this sensation, combined with an extraordinary dependence on sense impressions. This compensates the rarefied air of the intuitive's conscious attitude, giving it a certain weight, so that complete sublimation is prevented. But if, through a forced exaggeration of the conscious attitude, there should be a complete subordination to inner perceptions, the unconscious goes over to the opposition, giving rise to compulsive sensations whose excessive dependence on the object directly contradicts the conscious attitude.
The introverted intuitive type has the same capacity as the extroverted intuitive for smelling out the future, having the right guess or the right hunch about the not yet seen future possibilities of a situation. But his intuition is turned within, and therefore he is primarily the type of the religious prophet, of the seer. The introverted intuitive is often got in touch with her inferior sensation. The introverted intuitive is often so completely unaware of artifacts that his reports have to be treated with the greatest care. Though he does not lie consciously, he can tell the most appalling untruths, simply because he does not notice what is right under his nose. I very often distrust ghost reports, for instance, and reports about parapsychological facts for those reasons. Introverted intuitives are very much interested in such fields, but because of their weakness in observing facts and their lack of concentration on the external situation, they can tell you the most appalling nonsense and swear it is true. They pass by an absolutely amazing number of artifacts and just do not take them in.
Here is the book from Beebe.
Fi introverted feeling, appraising. Ti introverted thinking, defining. N I introverted intuition, knowing. Si introverted sensation, verifying. Fe extroverted feeling, affirming. T extroverted thinking, planning. Ne extroverted intuition, envisioning. Se extroverted sensation, experiencing. Se engaging, experiencing, enjoying. Si implementing, verifying, accounting. Ne entertaining, envisioning, enabling. Ni imagining, knowing, divining. Te regulating, planning, enforcing. Ti naming, defining, understanding. Fe validating, affirming, relating. Fi judging, appraising, establishing the value.
Here is his table for the 8 cognitive function model.
Conscious hero, heroine, area of strength and pride. Organizes adaptation, initiates individuation. Father, mother area of fostering and protecting. Nurtures and protects others. Poor, puella, area of immaturity and endearing, vulnerable child who copes by improvising. Anima, animus, area of embarrassment and idealization, gateway to the unconscious. Unconscious, opposing personality, area of frustration and challenge. Defends by offending, seducing, avoiding, self-critic, senexa witch. Area of limit setting and control, defends by refusing, belittling. Inactivating, sets limit, trickster. Area of manipulation and paradox, mischievous. Creates double binds. Circumvents obstacles, demonic, daemonic. Area of undermining and redemption, undermines self and others, creates opportunities to develop integrity.
And here are the 16 types with their cognitive functions. Now let's talk about the censor and filler bias. This is by far the most annoying thing I experience in the MBTI community. Many millennials and Gen Z individuals are getting results as an special intuitive unicorn, and since they don't get along with their parents, they conclude that it must be because they are censors. We can all agree that we are all somewhat stupid in our youth, but they are making the MBTI a stupid second horoscope, a reason to discriminate against other people. Seriously, I've even seen people blocking certain times because they are, quote, bad people. MBTI doesn't define your political alignment, whether you're a good or terrible person, your tastes in music, films, books, hobbies, etc. Let's look at the most popular example, Jesus Christ of Nazareth and the Awful Austrian with a mustache. Both are ENFJs. Do you think they're really similar? Of course not. You might hate Christianity, so see Jesus as a fictional character. But let's look at the facts. Jesus, as mentioned in the Bible, was friends with the outcasts and even prostitutes, even the gays in Matthew 8:5-11. Jesus is particularly difficult to type. Most people type him as an INFJ. But after recalling some data, since I was raised Catholic and doing research, I concluded that he actually is an ENFJ. His FE is too strong, and he constantly uses SE to travel and make miracles happen. However, TI doesn't seem to be the problem, since he expresses his own logic within himself. For example, if any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. But this is obvious, because considering he was the Son of God, he's going to be an almost flawless character. However, there are moments that we can see when he was angry, like when people were selling stuff in the house of God and turned the tables around. But he's too balanced. The quote that made me tag him as an ENFJ is this one: "Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today." Matthew 6:34. An NI dominant will never say that. They are constantly thinking about the future. Also, when he was crucified, he told God, "Please forgive them, they don't know what they are doing," thinking on other rather than himself. Sounds like a healthy FE dominant to me. He, on the other hand, is typed by my mentor, Armchair Typology, as an EFJ too. He did not only hate the Jews, but also the LGBT and mixed race, as he mentioned on his book, Mein Kampf, or however it is pronounced. History has countless examples of this. It shows in frightening clarity that whenever Aryan blood is mixed with inferior people, it lent to end the culture bearer. North America, whose people consist mostly in Germanic elements, which mixes very little with the inferior colored people, shows different humanity than Central and South America, where the mainly Romanic immigrants often mix to a large degree with the natives. In this example, you can clearly see the effect of race mixing. The racially pure and unmixed Germans of the American continent has ascended to its ruler. He will remain its ruler as long as he does not also consume miscegenation. So yeah, as you can see, they are not alike at all. He was living during a time after World War I, when Germany had economical struggle and sadness after not winning the war. He saw that using his SE, and he used his FE, knowing how people felt, and used his anti-Semitism as a scapegoat or solution for Germany's struggles. He was able to use FE to make Germans feel patriotic again. He knew how to put propaganda to brainwash Germans and make them think that the source of Germany's problems were the Jews. He was also a future thinker, since he made young boys go into camps to indoctrinate them into Nazi ideology. So he used his FE, putting society's values in the worst way possible. So in summary, the same types can be in completely opposite direction. Culture and environment play an important part when it comes to typing. The bias against sensors and feelers is the most ignorant thing. When I have tried to educate people, they tell me, "Oh, whatever, I'm just doing it for fun, lol." And while this might seem harmless, they make jokes that discriminate and aggravate the bias even more. If you like, now that you learn the cognitive functions and how each type has a sensation and feeling inside them, even if it's a third or fourth function, it is still inside them. Therefore, the bias is completely stupid. And they mention, but feelers cry about everything. And this is actually not true. As mentioned by the books, they have better controls over their own feelings. It's the thinkers the ones who have more struggle with it, especially TE and TI dominants. If you like something, why wouldn't you want to learn more about it? Are you afraid of not being as special as the tests claim you are? Most characters who are sensors are often mistyped as intuitives, just to please the majority that types like crap. That's why the last place you should look for personality database. Some biases go as far as South Korea. To my knowledge, I understand that companies make newbies take the test or get asked for their MBTI to see if they get the job, because they find that some types are problematic to work with. This is pretty foolish considering the test doesn't work, and I doubt that their human resources team has a degree in Jungian typology. What is wrong with these South Korean companies? We are supposed to have one of the best educations in the world, and this is brainless. And this also comes to people and their egos. They take the test, identify in some way with a certain character and say, he or she must be my type, or vice versa. I'm like this character. Personality database say that he or she is this type, so I must be this type. Percentages are a thing I strongly disagree with. First off, where was the data taken from? The foolish MBTI test or actual psychoanalyst typing? And which country? Because I can tell you from the country you live, you can have a huge impact on how you are going to behave because of tradition and surroundings. For example, Mexico is a very SE dominant country. We think here and now, and not too much on the future, while China is always thinking in constructing for the future, asking themselves, how will this look in 10 years? The same types could look so different in different cultures. Now, to end this, I'm going to type my favorite film and book from Jane Austen, Emma. You've been warned, spoilers ahead. Emma, according to Personality Database, is typed as an ENFJ, and George Knightley, her partner, as an ISTJ. I saw both movies, 2020 being my favorite, but also thought to myself, Emma can't be an FE dominant. To be sure, I read the book, and she was even more of a bitch than in both films. Just because she likes matchmaking and getting people married doesn't mean that she's an FE dominant. In fact, she's a terrible matchmaker because of her poor FE. If she had been an FE dominant, she would have valued Harriet's values and let her marry her first crush, and also understand that in her society, Harriet didn't have the same privilege Emma has. In order to get a rich suitor, she treats Harriet like a puppy, telling her what she should and shouldn't do. She also hides her feelings, saying that she will never get married because she's already rich and has a good position. Emma also points out how this wouldn't benefit her because all of her goods, meaning her house and money, would go to her husband, TE, and has a good position, so she doesn't need it. But deep inside, she has always been interested in Knightley. She tries to repress her feelings for him, and it gets out when Harriet says that now she has a crush on him. For me, that's a TE dominant, with an obvious FI inferior. Then, is she an ENTJ or an ESTJ? She's really close-minded when it comes to the future. We can see this in her matchmaking. She says, Harriet must be for this guy and only this guy, because I say so. That's clearly an I, because she's not considering different alternatives for Harriet. We can also see that she has an awful FE when she doesn't notice that Mr. Elton doesn't have a crush on Harriet, but on Emma herself. This is also due to her NI. She thinks, since her first matchmaking worked out, she thinks that her path of getting Harriet and Mr. Elton together would work out, and she's blind to see that he actually has a crush on Emma because she's beautiful, she has a good position, and she has money. So she obviously was a more obvious choice, and this is noticed by Mr. Knightley. On the first matchmaking, Emma basically had luck because the partner was compatible. But even on the book, when his father says, "Poor Miss Taylor," to which Emma answered, "She's far from being poor," meaning that her matchmaking was based on economical and status reasoning. She has such a poor FE that she doesn't realize that Harriet was actually interested in Knightley instead of Frank. On the book, Emma herself thinks she has a crush on Frank, but then she realizes she doesn't because he went away for some time and she didn't miss him nor care for him. Finally, when she finally stops suppressing her FI and get a proposal from Knightley, she accepts it right away, and contrary to the film, she doesn't fix things for Harriet, despite being her best friend. She cares more for her feelings than her friends. Luckily for Emma, she doesn't end up alone since she gets another proposal from George Martin. As for Knightley, he's also mistype. He has a lot of FE, and it's shown in a very specific scene when he scolds Emma for treating Miss Bates so poorly. He mentions that she's poor, old, and unmarried. That's someone with a really good FE, understanding the social values. Also, when he scolds Emma and says that Robert Martin is a good fit for an orphan like Harriet, with no money or position, people think that he is an ESTJ because of the stereotypes that ESFJs are so soft and make cookies, but they can't be tough. Also, he cares more that she reciprocates her feeling, making it more FE. If he was an ESTJ, he would care more about his own feelings. At this point, you might be thinking that I am contradicting myself, because Mr. Knightley didn't realize that Emma actually loved him back. But this is false, because she has FI inferior. As we read in the books, FI inferior is difficult to show, and even Miss Taylor, that basically raised Emma, thought that she had a crush on Frank Churchill, to which Emma answered, "No, I actually was thinking that he would be a good match for my friend Harriet." The way he treats Robert Martin is really nice. He's an actual friend, and doesn't see him as less just because he's a farmer. Unlike Emma, who thinks she's better than everyone else, until Jane Fairfax plays a marvelous song in the piano. She even gets jealous of her. She likes to be the admirer and the center of attention. Very SEO of her, but not a dominant function. Knightley also notices Emma's jealousy with Jane Fairfax. There is also a scene when it is rumored that Mr. Knightley is the one who gave Jane Fairfax a pianoforte. This on the book is clearly mentioned that it makes her jealous. On the book, she talks directly to Mr. Knightley and talks about the pianoforte, which he answers, "I dislike surprises," and this makes Emma relieved, making her again FI inferior showing up. Lastly, a very FE decision is that Knightley accepts to live in Emma's house instead of his, because he knows that she deeply cares for her father and doesn't want to leave him alone. I'm going to type a more challenging characters. This is going to be Bella Baxter for Poor Things, only the movie, because after reading the book I've noticed that these are two completely different types. So, spoilers ahead, you've been warned. Now, of course, Bella Baxter is typed as an intuitive, especially an ENTP. Why? Because she's so random, so she must be an ENTP. That's how things work, right? My answer is no. She's a complex character because of her development, considering she starts with the brain of a fetus inside a woman's body, but develops quickly and in the end ends up as a brain of an adult. First, we can see a lot of SE with her. She loves experimenting with ink, looking on the outside, even throws a tantrum because Godwin would not let her go outside. She ends up engaged with her guardian, but the lawyer Duncan, who makes the contract for her marriage, ends up asking her to elope with him. Bella, not knowing another environment other than her house, quickly agrees, but doesn't care about the future. Max says that she can't do that because she's already engaged to him. Effie. She says that she will eventually come back and marry him, but now, Essie, she's going to go to Lisbon with Duncan because she likes the way he touched her, Fi. But you might also think she uses a lot of NE when she sees a lot of perspective of other people, and Effie when she gives money to the poor people. And when she mentioned that the prostitute should choose the man instead of the other way, and I had to really think about this, but no, she's not using any or FE for that matter. She starts gaining more information by reading and meeting new friends. TE. For that, she makes her own values, FI. She goes to Alexandria and experiments something that leaves her in shock. She takes all of Duncan's money without telling him, and she gives it away to some worker that believes that they will give this to the poor people in Alexandria. If she had FE, she wouldn't have taken someone else's money, even more without asking him. And if she was using any, she would probably take some of the money and use the other money for other locations with poor people. When she said that prostitutes should be the ones to choose the man, it's because she already had the experience of not liking the guys. And when she sees another alternative to make the world less hideous, she makes a way for her. In the end, she comes back to Godwin because he's dying and she cares for him. She's about to marry Max. She's interrupted but her previous husband, because let's remember it was the woman of a body that had another brain, but the body was the same. That's why she had another husband before. But of course she doesn't remember him because it's another brain. She decides to go with him despite not knowing what kind of a man he is and not thinking about the future. Again, most likely an inferior NI. When she sees that he's a huge asshole, she now wants to leave him, SE. And when he tries to put her to sleep with a drink, she grabs it and throws it to his face, SE again. They are more impulsive. NE will think of different ways to escape or to confront him, but NE dominants take a lot more time in doing things, while SE dominants, it comes naturally to them. Act and then think about what you just did. She ends up taking his gun and shot him in the leg. Since her values are that killing people is wrong, she takes him to her house, and Max, who does have FE, tells her that if he's cured, he will take revenge on her. So she instantly thinks of exchanging his brain to one of a goat. Again, this is SE, not NE, because with NE, Bella would talk with Max about several choices to do, not just one. Lastly, at the end, she decides she wants to be a doctor, FI, because she has experienced a lot and sees that she likes that more. If she was an NE and FE user, she would probably have bought the brothel and make prostitutes choose their man instead of the other way while studying, because NE users like to think of several things and also try to do several things at the same time, but it takes a lot of them to finish something. But yet she chooses just one path and only helps her friend or girlfriend from the brothel. Again, FI. So yet again, another sensor who's been mistyped as an intuitive because of lazy people typing. Anyway, that's why I only speak of the MBTI with people who actually care for real typing and stop trying to educate people so they get the proper time. I'm so done with this community. I will enjoy it by myself and with people that I consider have the same knowledge as me. If you're angered by this, I seriously don't care. I just hope you actually learn something from it and do more research on your own. And if only one person learns something from this video, that's good enough for me. Also remember that typology is not factual science. Actual psychologists use the Big Five, but you just told us that 16p is a bad version of that. The thing is that 16p is a bad mixture between typology and Big Five that concludes in how special you are. Actual Big Five is basically how much you suck, lol. That's why it isn't as popular among regular people. Now, you can insult me in the comments or debate me. To be honest, I will most likely ignore it since I have better things to do. Leave a dislike, whatever you want. I just wanted to get this out of my system because I see that nobody else was pointing this out.